The Bosch GKT 18V-52 track saw is part of Bosch's 18V family of bi-turbo cordless tools. It's recommended to be used with the newer 18V Pro-Core batteries, which have a newer design, but it is still cross-compatible with any of the older 18V batteries from the platform. To achieve its maximum output, you need to pair it with at least the 8Ah Pro-Core battery, or even better, the high-capacity 12Ah Pro-Core battery, both of which are rated to supply the 90A maximum current draw that the motor needs at its theoretical max output of 1620 watts, which is pretty remarkable for a single battery unit. In terms of dimensions, the GKT 18V-52 comes in at a length of 374mm, with a width of 209mm, and the height of 234mm. This means that this track saw comes in much narrower than its counterparts and occupies a lower volume. In fact, the twin battery Makita comes in at around 24% larger in terms of space occupied, and the 40V Makita does a bit better, but it's still around 13% larger. So in terms of compactness, I think Bosch did well with their design. When it comes to weight, it's more or less the same picture. Both Makita cordless track saws come in at around roughly 4,400 grams bare tool, while the Bosch comes in at 4,100 grams. So in terms of compactness and being handy to move around, Bosch did really well. The compactness in design doesn't come for free though. As they say in physics, there is no free lunch. In order to accommodate the smaller design, Bosch had to reduce the blade diameter. The blade equipped on this tool is 140mm, while on the Makita counterparts, they're both at 165mm. This results in a smaller cutting depth for the Bosch. The Makitas have a cutting depth of 56mm on the track, if I'm correct, while the Bosch comes in at 46mm. It's just barely able to cut through 2-inch nominal thickness wood. So, for sheet goods, that's more than enough. But if you're going to cut thicker pieces of lumber, this might not be adequate for your requirements. Another feature of the saw is this very narrow clearance on its right side, meaning you can cut right up to a wall. So there's only a 1cm gap between any outside surface here and the edge of your blade. The depth adjust on this track saw comes in the form of a convenient push button slider. I think this is much faster and much more ergonomic than the Makita's traditional screw type tightener. This push button mechanism can be adjusted in 1mm increments. This, however, has one disadvantage, that is, it doesn't have a fine adjust. Meaning, if you need to make a precision adjustment for joinery or dados that are under a millimeter, it's not the best. I mean, 1mm, less than a millimeter isn't that much, but still, that has to count for something. Once you've adjusted your depth of cut, you can now plunge the saw by releasing the lock over here using your thumb. This thumb release also functions as the safety switch, as you cannot trigger the saw without pressing it. The bevel adjust comes in the form of two knobs, here at the front and one on the back, where you loosen it up, and you can adjust the tilt of the saw from there. I need two hands for this. The depth adjust for the saw comes in the form of two knobs, one in the front and one in the back, which you can loosen up in order to be able to tilt the saw to your desired angle. It has a positive stop at, of course, 0 degrees and another at 45 degrees. You can also extend the cut up to 47 degrees by pressing this red button over here. And when you push it back, it just clicks back into place and you have your positive stop at 45 degrees again. If you need to do a negative 1 degree cut, you can also press the same red button and it drops the blade angle to negative 1 degrees. And same as before, you can just pop it up again and it springs back and you now have your positive stop back at 0 degrees. So I think this is pretty convenient. And you tighten the two knobs front and back to secure your angle selection. The calibration for the saws 0 and 45 angle degrees can be found here on the side. So there is a hex key here for which to adjust the 0 degree setting, and the one on the bottom adjusts the 45 degree setting. A disadvantage of the Bosch track saw compared to the Makitas are the positive stops. The Makitas have a positive stop at 22.5 degrees, which this saw does not have. I've never had to use it before, but for those who might need to do that angle of cut, keep that in mind. You can modify the speed of this track saw through this handy dandy light up user interface. So it starts up at the lowest setting with number 1 at 2800 RPM all the way up to 5500 RPM at number 6. It also has this special eco mode wherein electronics in the saw prioritize efficiency over raw power. This means you extend the battery life or your runtime by around 30% in exchange for a slightly slower cut. In comparison, the LXT track saw from Makita has a higher top-end speed, ranging from 2,500 at its lowest all the way up to 6,300 RPM. The 40V XGT variant has a slightly slower top speed, and it ranges from 2,500 to 4,900 RPM. But when you factor the blade diameter into the equation, it ends up that the Bosch track saw and the 40V XGT have pretty much a similar blade cutting speed range, while the 36V clearly has an advantage in the top end of things. That being said, I've never had any issue with regards to the top speed of this saw. I've never had any tear out when I'm using the guide, and it works. It's perfectly adequate for what I'm using it for. And from what I've heard with regards to the 40V XGT Makita, people were worried at the slightly lower high-end RPM, but in practice, once they use the saw, it's doing the job well enough. So I guess in that sense, these two saws, although they have a slower top speed than the 36V LXT, they're perfectly fine for the job. The dust exhaust system on this saw is also pretty good. It comes with this dust port that is pretty snug and tight. It also has positive stops, so you could point it at the direction which is most convenient for you to get those hoses out of your way. The plunge saw comes in its own L-box with a foam insert to hold the contents safe and secure during transport. Now, since this is a bare tool kit, this doesn't come with any batteries, but it does have storage slots for two 8Ah Procore batteries here on the slot on the top right hand corner, and you can place a second battery on the saw itself. The kit comes with the saw, a dust bag, and manuals for both the plunge saw, and the GCY42 Bluetooth module, with which you could connect the saw to your smartphone via the Bosch Toolbox app. To replace the blade, we do the following steps. First, we take out the battery for safety purposes. This reveals this Allen key which is stored on the base plate. We then flip the saw over and pull this red lever on the top. This allows us to plunge the saw and lock it into place, exposing the bolt which holds the blade. Lifting the lever also reveals the spindle lock, which is located over here. Next, we loosen this up, holding the spindle lock, and we just take the bolt out. We take the flange out as well. And we can remove our blade. The blade that comes with this saw is a 140mm Expert for Wood alternating tooth blade by Bosch. It has a 20mm arbor, so make note of that when you're buying replacement blades. Release the lever and the saw pops back into place. Restore the key, replace the battery, and we're good to go. The track slop, or the wiggle of the saw when placed on the rails horizontally, can be adjusted using these two sliders, one here on the front and one here sitting on the back. So when you move the slider forward, this plastic segment pushes up higher for a tighter fit. Same here with the slide on the back. So you can set your saw on the track, see the feel of the motion of the saw, and adjust accordingly for a proper fit while still maintaining the ability to glide over the rail. The plunge saw has two tracks underneath it. One is for the Bosch and Bevel tracks. The other one is for Makita and Festool type tracks if you remove this plastic cap. As mentioned earlier, you could adjust the saw speed via this user interface by pressing this button. However, that is not all that the user interface is for. It also has a bunch of indicators for temperature and connectivity. It also follows a stoplight scheme where it turns yellow or red depending on the status of your tool. It turns yellow when the battery is low, it turns red when there's a critical issue with the tool, and it turns blue when you're connecting to it via Bluetooth. Based on first impressions, the GKT 18V-52GC feels like it is a tool geared towards users who don't want too much fuss. It aims for ease of use from its feature set. Looking at its depth adjust, single battery operation, user interface, easy to use plunge mechanism, decent dust extraction, it basically ticks all of the boxes that you would expect from a cordless plunge saw. Now, it's not the most powerful cordless plunge saw out there on the market, but it will certainly do the job in a smaller, lighter weight, ergonomic package. This is part 1 of my review of the GKT 18V-52GC. Now, I'll be coming up with a more long-term, in-depth review of the same tool after I've used it for a couple of months. If you enjoyed this video, or if you found the content useful, please like and subscribe. Now, I'll be coming up with more content like this about tools, woodworking, and DIY craft in the future. So please help support the channel by smashing that like button and subscribe. Thank you.